Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the next edition of the PEG Experts Forum webinar series. Today, we are really fortunate to have with us Sue Buske, who is going to be talking to us about diversifying funding at PEG stations. So we know a lot of you are getting most of your funding, or in some cases, all of your funding from a single source. And today we're here to talk about ways that you can try to diversify that and make yourselves more financially stable in the future. As I mentioned, this is part of our PEG Experts Forum webinar series, and you can find that here on our website. We're looking at cablecast.tv. If you go to our community resources section and then click PEG Experts Forum, you will come to this landing page here where we have a little intro to the series, a place to subscribe to future updates, and also the different types of content that we offer within this series. So webinars like the one you're on today, blog posts, which come from a variety of sources, including potentially you, if you have something you'd like to contribute or a topic that you would like us to consider covering in this series. There is a little spot here at the top where you can email us. That email will actually come to me about future topics. And we also have a live workshop series, which we will get going again in the fall, but we have one video up from our last live workshop, and I actually have another part 2 video from that workshop that will hopefully be getting up online soon. And now onto format. Like I said, we're going to do things a little bit differently than we normally do, which is full presentation and then Q&A at the end. Sue would like to do things a little bit more conversational, which I think is great, particularly for this topic. So what we're going to do is start the presentation, and then just every few minutes or so, we're going to check in and have a conversation about where we're at so far in the discussion of potential revenue streams. So now we are going to go ahead and pass the screen to Sue and get going with her presentation.
What I'm going to share with you today is sort of a combination of a number of things. Over the last more years than I care to admit, I have been working in this field, and one of the things that I have found is that in this field we've been very lucky. We've had many places have had a secure funding source because that has come from the cable operator as a result of the franchise agreements between the cable operator and the local government. In some cases, most or all of the funding came from the cable operator to the local government, and then from the local government to either one or several entities that were managing either PEG under one roof, or P only, or PG, or some combination thereof. Most nonprofits, particularly most places that provide services like this, whether it's a community media center or not, haven't had that luxury of having that funding. Well, the reality is now that over the last 10 years, things have changed dramatically. It started to change with the elimination of local franchising in 20-some states across the country. And in many of those states, the funding that was available for access completely went away because the state franchises didn't provide for anything. And what has happened during that period of time, and even starting slightly before, is the reality that we have to really look at, if we want to be able to continue to maintain providing services, community media services to people in our cities and towns, then we've got to find additional funding sources other than those that come from as a result of the franchise agreement. Now, that doesn't mean we shouldn't be continuing to support the concept of local franchising. We should be sure that any entity that's using the public rights of way is paying compensation back to the community, to the local government, for use of those rights of way, and that funding then can be turned around to be providing media services through a nonprofit or whatever for PEG. But what we do need to be looking at is how we can diversify those funding sources and build long-term sustainability. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I'm going to be sharing with you sort of a planning approach to starting to build long-term sustainability. And also, I'm going to be giving you some ideas about what folks are doing out there right now. I don't know if anybody, or maybe there's somebody out there, but I don't know of anybody who's generating all of their support or even close to 50% of their support from sources other than the franchise agreements. There may be a few really small places that have, let's say, a $50,000 a year budget that may be generating a pretty substantial part of their funding from something other than the cable operator or the local government. But that's really very much the exception rather than the rule today. So let's start out with this. Here are some things that I really think are critical for you to understand if you're going to have long-term sustainability. Number one, you are not running an access TV station anymore. You need to be providing a community media center. And that community media center will provide obviously local content that's broadcast on the cable system, but also ideally it will be broadcasted, delivered on multiple platforms. Every platform you can get it on. And you're not just going to be doing TV content. You need to be doing media services, the kind of media services that public agencies, governments, schools, community organizations need and want. And you may say, well, how do I know if they need and want it? Well, that's part of why you need to do a sort of a planning process to get input from folks to find out what they need and what they want. That's why it's critical to keep your and that is how you will keep your services fresh and up to date, by actually gathering information about how your community creates and consumes media. One of the things that we have consistently not been very good at in this field, at least from my observation around the country, is either branding who we are and what we do, or if we need to rebrand it, and then marketing it, letting people know what the community media center is, what the services are that your department, if you're a city department or your school or whatever organization you are that's providing community media services, what you do, how you do it, and how people can avail themselves of those services. You need to, when we're looking at long-term sustainability, you need to build from your strengths. And I say that because, number one, there is no one-size-fits-all to create and diversify funding sources. There are a number of ways people are doing it, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But you've got to start by saying, well, who are we? What do we do well? Okay. You need to build or expand your political support. That is critical, whether you're in a state where you still have local franchising, or whether you're in a situation where you don't have local franchising and you're having to really go out and solicit funding and through earned income or whatever, in a number of different ways. You need to have not only the elected officials, but also the critical city staff or school board members. You need to get them on your channels. You need to make sure they're aware of your services. You need to build political support. So then that political support will come in extremely handy no matter what situation evolves, whether it's around fundraising or whether it's around service delivery, or it's around somebody put something on your channel and people don't like it. You really need to build that political support. You need to take advantage of the huge growth in social media and alternative sources of income, of content, excuse me. One of the things that we found as we've done public input processes around building financial stability, doing strategic planning, even franchise renewal processes, is that we found that when you ask people who were providing services to the community, let's say all types of nonprofits, you know, whether it's the Elks Lodge or whether it's the Girl Scouts or whether it's the Arts Council, one of the things we ask is, okay, what makes it hard for you and your organization to get your message out? And what they say is, there are so many ways that people are getting information now that we don't know which one to select to get our message to our desired audience or clientele. And we don't have the money, and we don't have the expertise, and it's confusing, and it's information overload. This third bullet, you need to become the experts in social media and alternative sources of content. You need to be providing a service to community organizations, local government agencies, schools, about how they can more effectively get their desired content, whether it's announcement of a meeting or whether it's transparency with regard to complete live gavel-to-gavel coverage of a meeting. You need to be the experts in that, and that is a service you can provide once you become the experts at it. But you also have to take advantage of it yourself. You need to build community and economic development partnerships. And these come in a whole lot of forms, and I'll talk more about them later. They could become joint processes with community and economic development of a department of your city, workforce development projects, teaching media and media skills, There's a whole lot of them, and I've seen some very interesting examples in some of the work that we've been able to do. You obviously have to be able to respond to the very unstable regulatory environment that we are in right now, whether it's the FMPRM from the FCC that threatens to take away charges for our channels, hypothetically, or charges for the upstream feed to get our signal from the master control of our media center or the city hall or whatever to the head end. We have to be prepared to respond to these unstable regulatory environment. And that ties back up to building and expanding political support. So in order to sort of take advantage of all these things, we found that it's really good to go through a sort of a planning process, to develop a roadmap that's aimed at making your organization and your media center more effective in delivering media content, whether it's on a cable channel, online, or media services. It's sort of like a roadmap. And at the same time, being able to do that without compromising your values and your principles. So let's take a look at what that process, what I call the re-envisioning process really is. And I'm going to stop there for a minute. And Michelle, do we have any questions so far?
Yes, we do have some points of conversation at this point. Jason says their PEG programming funds come from community college campus they're housed on, and they currently get cut yearly. So you're saying those funds, the amount that you get from the college is being reduced every year. Jason is in San Antonio College in San Antonio, Texas.
And I'm assuming Jason must be running the Education Access channel?
Can you give us a, yes, he does.
Okay. That's one of the interesting things about this field is there's so many different varieties of how places are funded. Your situation there in San Antonio is pretty different than a lot of places. Frankly, there aren't a lot of strictly educational access to, channels that are running independent of either a PEG under one roof or whatever. So you're in a unique situation, number one. There's not a lot of strictly e-channels running just by a college or school district or whatever. It sounds like your situation is such that you're going to have to potentially raise funds in addition to anything that the college will provide you. But also, I think this building political support could also have a good deal to do with helping to make sure, at least try to ensure that maybe your funding isn't cut, or identifying the services that the college wants or the information that the college wants to get out to the public that's not being delivered on the channel right now. So this kind of leads me right into sort of this process that we work with folks on to gather information to figure out how to find additional funding, regardless of where that funding source may be. And then in your case, you may be slightly more limited than some of the other places, but it's still possible. So let me kind of take one more step in, do a little bit more, and then we'll come back to more questions. So when you're doing what I call a re-envisioning process, which is really will build the roadmap or the plan to help you, number one, just improve your services overall, but also to generate additional income. There are about 5 different key activities that ideally need to be undertaken. Now, this is going to vary a little bit depending upon your management situation, your structure, but number one, board and staff need to be committed to a process of figuring out how can we do our job better and how can we generate additional revenue in so doing, okay? Number 2, you need to objectively evaluate your current operations, and if you have a board or a committee or a commission you deal with, the functionality of that body. And I'm going to dive into each one of these separately in a bit. You needed to undertake what I call an environmental scan, but simply stated, it's a public input process, okay? You need to seek input from the community and from key stakeholders. And that is typically done, in our experience, in a couple of ways. Number one, you're going to want to do some kind of focus group or stakeholder meetings. And number 2, you're going to want to do some kind of a public online survey kind of process. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the mistakes I've seen people make in doing this and why it's important to have a very big tent when you're gathering information with regard to where you're going to go in the future service-wise and how you can generate additional revenue in so doing. And then you need to look at what's worked and what's not worked in other places. And I mean, there are some places that have actually been doing a lot of independent fundraising, and I don't want to use the word fundraising, revenue generation is a better term, for a long time. And so we can take a look at what works some places and what doesn't work. And this goes back to there's no one size fits all. You've got to take a look at what works other places. You need to evaluate your own circumstances, and that will help you determine what I might call the low-hanging fruit is to move forward. And as a result of this kind of a process, which will typically take about 6 months, you'll have a roadmap, a multi-year plan, probably about a 3-year plan, that will, and you'll be able to start implementing some things pretty quickly if you've done a pretty thorough input job, and other things you may not be implementing till a number of years out. So this is really not something that, you can't wave your fingers, wave your finger, snap your fingers, wiggle your nose, and it's all going to happen overnight. This takes time. I mean, at the very end of this presentation, I'm going to give you an example of a place that's been at it 15 years, and they're raising now a bit over half of their $1.5 million budget from other sources other than cable franchise dollars. So first, objectively, I'll evaluate your current operations. Look at what you're doing. Are you a PEG? Look at the services you're providing. Have you been maintaining data if you are on a longitudinal basis? By that I mean, have you kept data on how many hours of first-run local programming did you do 5 years ago versus 3 years ago versus 2 years ago? What are the trends if you're offering classes? What are the trends in classroom enrollment? Have you changed? Has it been trending down? But have you just been doing the same old, and not figuring out maybe there's a change in what people want in class enrollment and the kind of classes they're getting? How about equipment use? Is your portable equipment being checked out as much as it used to be? If you provide equipment to the public, what kind of equipment are you checking out on the portable side? Is a studio being used? Are you doing a lot of live programming? Number of people using services, the demographics of the users, and viewership data. Either it's rare to be able to get viewership data from the cable operator. I see many places now are getting stuff with regard to Google Analytics or so forth. I would be very cautious in making major decisions based on only what you get from your Google Analytics, because you could be missing a very big part of your audience, your existing audience. So you need to look at all aspects of what's working and what needs to be changed. And what's going to happen is, if you look at this information in the context of the other information you're going to be gathering, you're going to begin to see where you need to make changes. So I'm going to kind of jump on to the next one of these steps, which I mentioned earlier, which is if you have a board, whether that board is a nonprofit board, there's some places where access is under the umbrella of a larger institution, community service agency, or whatever. You need to look at how your board or your advisory board is functioning. And part of what I'm going to talk about here now really probably applies more to places that are operating with 501c3 nonprofits, but the basic concept is still the same. What we've tended to do, and what we found very helpful, is to give the board a self-evaluation survey. And that survey will allow the board to provide input in what they think, the services you're providing. What are the strengths? What are the things that have worked in the last 3 years? What are the things that have not worked so well? And you're going to look at areas like operations, branding and marketing, and outreach. You're going to look at service provision, etc. You're going to ask these questions around a number of different aspects of what the organization does, and you're going to end up with a pretty nice confidential board survey that is going to give you some very clear information about how your board has been engaged. Do they really understand what's going on? Okay, what the services are that you're providing, and this particular kind of information, you don't give it out to anybody with any personally identifiable information in it. You do an analysis of it, you do an overall summary, and then that information comes back in the form of study sessions for the full board. And those study sessions basically we find are very helpful in that many times the board, if you have a board, and I know some of you don't and some of you do, so you'll just have to bear with me for those of you who don't deal with boards that are on this webinar. Many times the boards don't go to the ACM conference, Alliance for Community Media Center conference, or the NATOA conferences. They do not have a sense of what is happening, what the trends are across the country, what's working and what's not working, what are the threats, what are and so part of these study sessions for the board is to bring them up to speed on that data, on that information, give them a sense of the feedback that's come in overall with regard to they as a body, their evaluation, and then you're going to look at mission, core values, and goals. The purpose of this session, these sessions really is to build buy-in by the board, make the board smarter about what you as many of you or staff are doing, and also make them smarter about what's happening around the country and what the threats are that your organization, if it's not facing now, it's probably going to be facing in the future. Out the other end of these, and usually we typically do 3 of them in a 6-month period of time. The first one is overall information gathering and about the board and presentation of what's happening in the field. And then later on, you're going to start to give the board input based on the environmental scan, the surveying, and the information that you've gathered. So this is yet another piece of a process that's going to help you come out the other end with figuring out what are the things we need to be doing first, second, third, fourth, or whatever, with regard to generating additional funding and thus building long-term financial stability. So the environmental scan, as I mentioned earlier, really has 2 key aspects. One is an online survey, and another one is community focus groups. Our stakeholder meetings, call them what you like, it's getting input from the community. Now, I have found in my experience that the bigger the tent is you put out, the broader the database of the broader the group of people are that you are gathering information from, the better. So you're going to want to do stakeholder meetings or focus groups that involve your staff. You're going to want to do them involve the community at large. In some cases, you will invite folks who have used your facility. But the hardest part sometimes is getting input from people who don't know who you are, who you've never touched with services. And so one of the things that's very helpful to do is to look at a list of people who use entities that have used your services, and then look at a nice compiled list of nonprofits and schools and such in your community who are there, and compare them and look at who's missing from your current user or your current and past user list, all right? That information that comes from the people you've not touched is just as important as the information you get from the people who you have touched. Because you're going to find out, number one, why haven't they watched the channel? Why haven't they seen the content? Why haven't they used their services? Maybe they didn't know about them in the first place, okay? So by doing this kind of public input process, you're going to gather a lot of helpful information. You're going to get information about awareness of current services and channels, viewership, where they watch. If you're delivering services on multiple platforms, do they watch on the cable channel, on your website, on YouTube? Where do they see your content? Okay. Where do they find and seek information about what's going on in the community? Is it websites? In other words, it's not about just you, but where do people in the community find out about what's happening in the community? What kind of local information do they most value? What kind of local information are they not getting? What media and technology services would they like to receive? So when you're doing this sort of needs input process, you're going to get certain kinds of information from these focus groups or stakeholder meetings, and you're going to get different kinds of information from the online survey. And it's going to be very valuable to get information in both formats. But I really do strongly encourage folks to not just limit their public input process to what I call the usual suspects. It really is very helpful to get it from a broad cross-section of the community if you have the ability to, and it is time-consuming to do that. But we found in our experience and in the experience of other places who've done this, that's really helpful. So let's go on to the next slide. We're kind of winding down now on the process of getting information that will then help you determine how to build more financial stability and long-term sustainability. So the screen that's up right now, basically we're talking about taking a look at what's worked and not worked elsewhere, okay? And that is, I think, and for me, as a person who's worked in this field for a very long time, I find it as valuable to find out what hasn't worked someplace as what has worked. So you really need to look at both of those things. And I want to back up for just one quick minute here, if I can, to this information gathering process. To give you a sense, right now I'm analyzing some data from a couple of different places. We're helping out with this process, and what's fascinating to me is how instructive this information that you get from the community needs assessment process, both from your board, from your staff, and from the community at large, how instructive it becomes in determining, geez, I never thought of that. We should be doing that. And kind of shaping where you want to go in the future. So when we're looking at building long-term financial stability, we're looking not just at, gee, how can I sell an ad, but more, what services can I provide and what does the community want now, okay, that I'm not doing, all right? Because those things can be opportunities for partnerships and for all kinds of potential revenue-generating opportunities that are going to help you sustain your services on a long-term basis if the FCC does something stupid or we lose funding that's coming from some of our more reliable funding sources. So in closing out this part of the presentation, just about a process for re-envisioning and kind of determining where we're going, out the other end of this kind of 6-month process that I've laid out here, what you're going to find is you may need to tweak your mission. You're going to find that you're going to have some changes in the services you provide, and you're going to very quickly identify certain things that can help you generate revenue in a way that you just haven't thought about before. You want to map all of this ideal on a Gantt chart or on a timeline so you can start immediately to do some of the things, make some of the changes that are going to result in building long-term sustainability. And I'm going to quickly kind of go through these because I've talked about them very briefly on the front end. You're going to probably expand the platforms you're delivering content on. You may find you're going to change, I have a little bit of a change out in the equipment you're using or providing access to. You're going to definitely, I think, find you're going to want to use social media more effectively. You're going to do a lot of branding and rebranding. One of the things I pretty consistently find is that when we get input from the public, people come to the meeting, go to a focus group meeting and go, and learn about what your organization does or your department does. They go, I didn't know you guys did that. What does that tell us? Branding, marketing, your channel, and your services more effectively. Okay. You're going to, if you have local franchising yet, you're going to definitely want to make sure that getting that your access channels, your community channels in HD, or whatever the most advanced format is that the commercial channels are using, and also your channels listed on the electronic and EPG, the electronic programming guide, again in the same format that the commercial channels are doing. Now, one of the things I have found, because I kind of wear the franchising hat too sometimes, is that it is possible to get the EPG part without, when you're in a state where you no longer have local franchising, because I know that some cable companies are starting to provide this service either free or for free or on a relatively affordable basis. And getting on the EPG is absolutely critical, because then people know what's on, what the show's about, they can DVR it, and that's one of the things when you do your public input you're going to probably find out, is that people want to DVR it, or they don't want to do appointment viewing, they want to DVR it and be able to watch whenever that elementary school play when grandma's in town in the summer, okay, even though it was run back 6 months ago on your channel or on YouTube. So again, these are just some changes that you'll need to be looking at, regularly getting input from your constituents in your community, not just doing it once every 5 or 10 years. It really is something you need to be doing regularly, because the way people consume and use media and media tools changes. You're going to probably see, for fundraising purposes, you're going to grow collaborations. You're going to expand and modify service. You're going to strengthen your relationship with local governments. These are all things that kind of activities, changes that very well likely may result from you taking a look at how you can be more stable financially and generate additional revenue. You're going to have to be looking at these things on a more regular basis. What might the changes, and this is not will, I foresee that we're going to see more places that have been serving a media center or a school or a library that's been serving one community, forming regional consortia to have a CMC serve multiple jurisdictions. Now, there are quite a number of those operations around the country. You'll find, for instance, a lot of them in Minnesota. You find very few of them in Massachusetts for a variety of reasons that I'm not going to dive into right now. You may see changes in the organization. In other words, who's running the channel, or what department, if you're in a school or a city, is running the channel. You may see changes if you're a nonprofit in board structure, okay? And another thing you might see as a result of this kind of process is developing a workforce planning process to evaluate current job descriptions and staffing, and determining how you need to change those things, because the services you're providing, or you need to be providing, or the management support you need to have in place will result in changing job descriptions and staffing. So you might need to look at a workforce planning process as part of this as well. And I haven't dived that much at all today into that whole side, the management side of things, but it's a whole nother workshop, really. So I'm going to now go in and tell you about a whole bunch of ways I've seen people generating revenue, but I'm going to stop for a moment. Michelle, what do we have? Any questions I need to take a look at?
We have a couple comments about boards, which I know we passed by the topic of boards a couple slides ago. We had Jerry commenting that their board has been a working board since inception, and that Jerry thinks they could put their board to much better use, but that they need a way to do it effectively. That's something they're thinking about. James is weary of getting his board involved because they are elected officials and they practice party politics, and it makes him uncomfortable to get close to any of them. That might be an issue that other people share. It looks like Jason also chimed in and said, between the party politics of their board and campus business politics, they're having to constantly remind the campus that they exist. And we've got a comment from Dave. How can you start providing new services to generate enough revenue but still stay true to your own base services that the community depends on? That kind of goes in with the needs assessment conversation.
So let me dive in here. Number one, if you have a board that's composed of elected officials, you need to be very careful, okay? Now, it depends. If you're just doing if you're doing G or E services only and not P, you have a different set of facts and I would answer this question differently, okay? If you're doing the P part, you want to really make sure that you are not, for a lot of reasons, and you are not in a situation where you have elected officials or appointed officials who are appointed to your board by a school district or by an elected body, that your board is dominated by that, because you can get into some really dicey fair political practices issues, content control issues, First Amendment issues. So that's a whole different conversation, but be very, very careful about that, okay? Secondly, the many places have had working boards, and and I'm working with one place right now that I mean, it's difficult, because if you have a very tiny budget, and your board has always been a working board, and the board has always been doing things that staff normally would do if you had the budget, it creates some really difficult, it can create some really difficult problems, because suddenly you've got board members telling support staff members what to do when it should be the general manager or the ED who is managing the staff. So I think the idea of, if you can, of moving your board from a working board to a more policy-oriented board is a very good idea. And I think that there are ways that can be done, but one needs to, for me to give you a straightforward, do it this way answer, I can't, because it's very fact specific to a certain situation. Okay, but there are ways to do that. But I do think that it is very important to keep the politics out of, to the degree you can, out of the environment in which policy decisions are being made and anything content or resource driven is being made. It just gets really messy. And with that, I'm going to dive back in here and finish up, and then we'll have more time for questions. So here's what probably a lot of you are going, what is this woman and why is she telling us about this process? We just want to know how to generate more money, okay? So here we go. Probably the most common way I've seen of folks generating additional revenue is production services and equipment and facility rentals. Now, again, this is going to vary. What I'm going to share with you is going to vary a little bit dependent upon your particular set of circumstances. But let me just dive in. Many places, whether you're a G only or a PEG or an E, are covering, based on the funding you're currently getting, the public meetings of an elected body. Okay, city council meetings, school board meetings, public agency meetings. However, one of the things that I've seen, and sometimes that's part of the base funding you're getting, okay, but another thing I've actually seen in some places is that the funding that's being provided is a fee for service, and that service is providing that meeting coverage, providing transparency for local government agencies, for public agencies with regard to their meetings, live and playback. Another thing I've seen is in places where you may have a certain amount of money coming in as part of a base contract that comes from the cable operator, okay, or from the city, that there are other government bodies that are not part of that relationship, i.e. special districts, sewer districts, water districts, who have a need for transparency and have a need for having their meetings covered. That is a perfect fee-for-service opportunity, a production service. And what I've seen is places that have traditionally just done city council meetings, the special districts have either approached them because they want their meetings covered, and folks generate production service, generate revenue for providing all kinds of transparency around meetings. There's some places that I'm aware of that are even doing it around hospital boards. Around, an interesting story is around a small access operation up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. There are a lot of vacation homes, and those vacation homes have homeowner associations, and the owners of those homes live in, say, the San Francisco Bay Area, but the homeowner association meetings happen up in Truckee or wherever that homeowner association meets. This little organization is providing meeting coverage of the homeowner associations, putting it online so the people in San Francisco who own those vacation homes can see the meetings. Again, they are being paid for that service. So you really need to think, even in some of the most basic things you do, how you can do those for other people who you may not be doing those for right now. The examples I provided. Another example is meetings, what I call video explainers. Short pieces, again, done for, and it could be done for government agencies, for schools, for hospitals, for nonprofits, that can be run on they can put on their website. What I call video explainers, things that explain a service that's being provided. Or, and some of those sorts of things are pretty evergreen, but these are production service contracts we're talking about here. All right. They can be put on websites, and some of them are evergreen, but some of them may have to do with an issue. And I'm just going to throw one out. Measles vaccination hasn't been an issue for a long time. Suddenly it's a big issue. Maybe there needs to be a video explainer from the local Kaiser Permanente or from the local healthcare center about, or the county office of health about why vaccinations are important, okay? These are all things that can be things that you're hired to do as a production service. And so I don't go too long on any one thing. Other media services, becoming the communications department for small towns, cities, and nonprofits. This is something that in a place we're working right now, when we did the public input process, we had the city managers coming to us and going, hey, we're a small village. We do not have the expertise to do IT or whatever. Could the Community Media Center organization provide that service to us for a fee? maybe I can get 20% of an existing staff person back to do what that staff person should be doing because they're trying to do a service right now in-house we don't have the skills to do. This is the kind of stuff that you learn when you do the public input process and the needs assessment process. And finally, renting your equipment out. If you have a truck, renting your truck. Facility rental income. There are a few places around the country where the community media center owns their own building. Longview, Washington, Maui, Hawaii are examples, and they generate rental income from having that building there, and that goes toward diversifying your funding sources. So kind of clicking on down. Sponsorships, programming, underwriting. Now, this is one that a lot of people dive to right away. Oh, well, we're going to sell underwriting support type ads for our programming. But you need to look at a lot of things. Number one, this is where you need to look at what you do well. Are you good at sports? Are you good at events? Okay. What do you do well? Okay. But if you're going to look at doing underwriting or sponsorships, who's going to solicit it? Who's going to sell it? How are you going to generate, how are you going to figure out how much it takes to do it versus how much you're going to sell it or market it for? What about follow-up with sponsors? In other words, you need to develop policies that relate to these things. These are all great ideas. I mean, there's some places that do great sports coverage, and they get a lot of really good input from people around their sports coverage. This may be a piece of the low-hanging fruit that you could start initially going and doing underwriting for. You may even have some analytics from stuff you run online that will show a sponsor or a potential underwriter, oh, gee, this by showing that we're supporting and sponsoring this football game series or women's volleyball or whatever it might be, that it's going to help us as a business. But you got to go into it and develop the underlying policies and procedures. Otherwise, you could end up creating a mess for yourself. So these are the things you need to look at. But sponsorships and program underwriting is another area. I'm going to click through these and then we'll go to questions. Collaborations, partnerships, and service projects. There are huge, this is an area next to production, next to the whole area of production services and facility rental and equipment rental. This is the area where I think has the largest amount of opportunity. There are some fantastic examples out there. Metro East in the Portland, Oregon suburbs has done a workforce development project in conjunction with the city of Gresham, Oregon, which is absolutely amazing. You need to look at their website. If you're going to the ACM conference, you'll get a chance, and in Portland, you'll get a chance to learn more about it. But that is a perfect opportunity, a perfect example of a partnership between a city department and the community media center, which started out as a demonstration project and now is attracting the attention of large granting agencies because it has been so successful. What do? They provide training in how to, it's called DIY Rockwood. They provide training in using computers, in smartphones for these. They provide video camps for kids, music camps. They've built a partnership with 13 or 14 different combinations of businesses and nonprofits. I would just point out that that is a really great example of a collaboration that started as a demonstration project and now is grown and will be generating both great community services, perfect, wonderful partnerships with the local government and other agencies, and grant funding on top of the sponsorships and underwriting that they've developed. In other words, this is again looking at where your opportunities are, what your strengths are, and being creative in structuring relationships. Fundraising, special events or activities, I've seen a fairly large range of these. Most of these things are not big money raisers. They are very good friend raisers. And they're very good ways of making your services more available to different people in the community. So classes go beyond the traditional training class. For example, I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when you do your public input process, you're going to find that nonprofits really in your community want help in figuring out how to educate the public about their services. This goes to providing training classes in social media, not just how to use it, but how to pick the right social media tool in order to help a particular organization get their message to whom they're trying to reach. How to cut through the clutter that a lot of us face, all of us on this phone, and all of the people in the community, how to cut through the clutter to get your message out more effectively. These are specialized trainings that go beyond traditional training, go beyond the normal, go beyond the usual things you've always done. Facility and resource sharing to reduce expenses. I have a couple of places right now that I'm aware of that are actually partnering with local online information and news sources and sharing their facility, memberships. All of these sorts of things are out there. So I'm going to stop now because I know that folks have probably got questions. This last slide I'll come to in a few minutes, but let's take a few questions, and this is my last slide.
Okay, so we've had a lot come in. I think let's start with the questions that I have in the Q&A box here. So we talked a little bit about boards before, and you gave your suggestion about working boards versus policy boards. But we have Stephen asking for any tips for a center like theirs that has a board but it hasn't been an active board. They hope to begin 6-month strategic planning process this summer. Would appreciate tips for growing the board.
Okay, so it depends on what you mean by growing the board. If you mean by growing the board, getting more active board members on, in other words, changing out board members versus expanding the number of people on the board, or is it growing the knowledge level? It's hard for me to answer the question, but let me just, if you have had a board, but the board has really not been active, you got to figure out why, okay? And that's the first thing. Why haven't they been active? Is it because they haven't been asked to be active? They haven't been given a job, so to speak? Is it because they don't know? Is it because none of these people, or very few of them, have ever been on a board, so they don't really know what the role of a board member is? You got to figure out why they haven't been active. Probably the most difficult thing you've got is if you have a situation where you've got board members who are really nice people, but just kind of show up or even don't even show up, and you don't want to offend somebody by saying, geez, we maybe need to try to get, we need to diversify our board. We need to have more younger people on our board or whatever. Sometimes you just need to give people a reason to say, I don't have time for this, but I'll help you find somebody else to fill my seat. So you got to figure out why your board hasn't been active, and then you can go to figure out how to grow it.
We got a follow-up comment saying that you hit on the point that he was asking, so we're good there. And if you have follow-up questions, feel free to type those in. We have another question from Rob at AppTV. AppTV is a university-owned e-channel. What are your thoughts regarding internal production services? Like a growing number of departments on the campus realize the value of televising their content, but the university doesn't dedicate operational funding for the channel. Does this seem like a feasible long-term plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what has to happen is the departments have to earmark some of their own budget for production services from you guys, from is it Rob's department?
It's Rob, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go. Maybe that could work for you, Rob. If you have follow-up on that, go ahead and type that in. He gave us a winky smiley face. Thanks.
Okay.
And then in the chat, there's been a lot of chatter in the chat, and it's cool that folks are like sort of jumping in and answering each other's questions and responding to each other. It's always good to see. One a while back from Clyde that I thought we should touch on is in one of your earlier slides, Sue, you talked about getting away from PEG and trying to become a community media center. And Clyde asked to provide a definition of community media center as you see it, as opposed to PEG.
Community media center does more than run a TV channel, in short. Okay. It provides media services to nonprofits. What are those media services? Well, some of the things that I mentioned. It's training in how to more effectively get how to do more effective messaging for the nonprofits in your community. It's training. It's building a partnership and doing media literacy work. Okay. A perfect example of would be what Metro East has done in Gresham, Oregon with their DIY, digital information youth Rockwood project, in which they provide training to people. This is a neighborhood, this is a partnership, it's a neighborhood where there are a lot of low-income folks and a lot of new immigrants. One of the things they do is they provide training on how to use computers, basic computer training, okay? Why? Because there is a need for it. Another thing they do, and as a result, if people complete the 12-week training course, they get a free computer. Where does the free computer come from? It comes from a local group called Free Geeks, who take in old broken down computers and fix them up. It's a nonprofit, and then they provide the computers to people who completed the course. So I'm giving you a sense. Another thing is this particular project teaches how to use smartphones and tablets to, in many cases, seniors. Okay, anybody who wants to take the course. So it's looking at yourself as more than just about making TV shows, in short.
Okay, hope that answers your question. Feel free to put in follow-ups. We have another one from Morgan, which I thought was interesting. She asks you, if you were only able to market to one demographic, which one would you focus on?
I wouldn't do it.
Can you elaborate?
You can't market to one demographic and think you're going to survive long term.
Okay.
I mean, your community is made up of many demographics. It's made up of seniors. It's made up of all different kinds of people. And if you're going to be, whether you're a government only operation or an E operation or a P operation, you've got to market your services to more than one demographic. And certainly, if you're going to think you're going to be able to develop funding sources beyond the cable companies and the local governments. Maybe I'm misunderstanding the term demographic. I'm not sure.
Well, and if Morgan has some more to say on that, she can type that in for us. And James is saying, as a city department, it seems difficult to raise revenues when the expectation is that the government provides services to the residents. Do you have comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, James. It is, and I would have to say that people who are running government access operations are probably the most limited in the ability to diversify funding. One of the things you could do, and this goes back to the comment from, I think, the answer to the question from, I think, Rob, the gentleman from the college, is that in some cities what we see is that there's a bill back process internally between city departments. So if a city department wants a service from the media services division at the city, your department, then they would budget money in there, put money in their budget for you guys to do a video explainer for them or whatever. But as far as the ability to generate for strictly government access programming services from an entity outside the local government, probably, I would say you're probably limited, more limited than a P or a PEG or some combination thereof. I mean, you could look at grant funding, working with, let's say, if you're a county and you have a county health department. Well, maybe the county health department can get a grant from some other state agency or federal agency or from some other entity to do something, and that grant can include funding to have a video or media services aspect. If your county or city, you have a library, well, maybe you can partner with the library. Those are the areas where I think you're going to be able to diversify funding if you're strictly G.
Yeah. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A here. Dana asks, what are your thoughts on how long it takes to successfully diversify revenue? How do you speak to stakeholders about patience?
It's not overnight, and that actually, the slide I have up right now, it says Grand Rapids Community Media Center. You're going to see this is someplace that's been at it for 15 years, actually more than that, of diversifying funding, and you're going to see that they're generating about half of their funding from sources other than from the first item there, say franchise fee, main pass-through. It just doesn't happen overnight. I mean, their diversification of revenue that you're going to see on the screen there is probably one not everybody can do, but I want to point to a couple of things that are very unique, but they also are big hunks of what they're generating. If you look at under theater rental services because of a partnership they did a number of years ago with the city of Grand Rapids, Michigan. They now operate a classic theater, and that theater, and they do screenings there, there's weddings there, there's all kinds of stuff. They generate $200,000, almost $201,000 a year off that. Look down there under donations. They run a full power FM radio station. Most of the donations come in off the radio station. But this list of revenue sources is kind of an interesting one to look at, which is why I selected it, because there are a lot of different things here, okay? But I will tell you, this didn't happen overnight. So back, Dana, to your question, folks have got to be patient. And that's why, you know, a lot of people are looking at, oh my God, because of the what the FCC is talking about now or whatever, we got to figure out a way of generating additional revenue. Unfortunately, we probably should have also been thinking about that a long time ago, because this doesn't happen overnight. But I do think that one of the things that will make you more stable and less vulnerable to these cuts is if you have a very good working relationship with your elected officials and your key city staff members.
We have, Dana says thanks. Thank you for asking that question, Dana. We have a question, or more of a comment, I guess, from Clyde in California, which is a statewide franchising state. He asked, does the community media center model work since the PEG fee is only for capital?
Number one, be aware that in California, the state law, the Digital Infrastructure and Video Competition Act, or DIFCA, does not require the money to be used strictly for capital. The word capital is not even used in the state law. And with regard to places, I happen to be in California, so I'm pretty familiar with this situation. There are numerous places in the state where the definition of what you can use the money for, which is based upon GAAP and based upon something more than buying a piece of equipment. It's the support, it's the maintenance of that equipment. It's the maintenance of the facility. It is the insuring of the equipment that allows it to have a longer lifespan, which in many local government agencies, that is considered capital. So it's actually in the state of California, we are finding people who are using the money for more than what we might traditionally think of as capital, but still staying within the letter of what the state law says, which is equipment and facilities.
Again, PEG Experts Forum is what this content series is called. I just want to thank Sue again for joining us today and giving us this very meaty and very needed presentation about diversifying funding for future stability. Did you have any final comments or anything you wanted to add, Sue?
Just good luck to everybody. I hope some of this information is helpful.